and the name Dustin Poirier.
10 star in the history of the sport.
Legend, fighter's fighter.
Most fighters retire broken, bitter, or forgotten. They chase one last payday that becomes 10 last paydays, fighting shadows of themselves until the sport they love destroys everything they built. They leave on stretchers instead of podiums, with regrets instead of respect, remembered more for their tragic endings than their legendary peaks. But every once in a while, a fighter shows the entire combat sports world how it should be done. From his final fight in front of his home crowd to his years of community impact outside the cage, Poirier proved that how you finish matters more than how you start. This is the story of how the diamond became the gold standard for retirement done right, and why every fighter should study his final chapter before writing their own. When Dustin Poirier stepped into the octagon for the final time, he didn't just want to win, he wanted to leave everything he had ever been as a fighter in that cage. UFC 318 in New Orleans wasn't just another fight card. It was a homecoming, a celebration, and potentially a funeral for one of the most beloved careers in modern MMA. The opponent couldn't have been more perfect. Max Holloway, the former featherweight champion and one of the most respected fighters in the sport, two legends, both past their championship primes but still capable of incredible violence, meeting for what everyone suspected might be Poirier's final dance. For 25 minutes, they put on an absolute clinic. This wasn't two faded stars going through the motions. This was elite-level mixed martial arts between fighters who understood the significance of the moment. Every exchange mattered, every round was contested, every second was treated like it might be the last. The final seconds of that fight captured everything beautiful about combat sports. With time running out, instead of playing it safe or protecting a lead, both men threw everything they had left at each other. Furious combinations, desperate takedown attempts, the kind of all-out warfare that separates special fighters from ordinary ones. When the final bell rang, both men embraced with the respect that only comes from shared violence. At the highest level, the decision went to Holloway, but that wasn't the story. The story was watching a legend leave everything he had in the place where it mattered most. Then came the moment that separated this retirement from every other farewell in recent memory. Instead of making excuses, complaining about judges, or hinting at comebacks, Poirier grabbed the microphone and delivered a speech that will be remembered long after the fight details fade from memory. The Octagon interview captured something rare in professional sports: a superstar athlete who understood that his success belonged to everyone who had supported him along the way. No ego, no bitterness, just pure gratitude for the opportunity to compete at the highest level of the most demanding sport in the world. Here's something that separates truly legendary fighters from merely successful ones: understanding that individual accomplishments matter less than the respect of your peers and the impact you have on the sport itself. Dustin Poirier never won an undisputed UFC championship, but his legacy is more secure than many fighters who did. The interim lightweight championship he captured by defeating Max Holloway at UFC 2036 proved he belonged among the elite. That wasn't a consolation prize or a participation trophy. That was recognition that he was one of the two best lightweights in the world at that moment. The fact that he never unified the titles doesn't diminish what he accomplished during that reign. But more importantly, Poirier's career proved that you don't need a belt to be considered legendary. His body of work, his style of fighting, and his approach to the sport earned him something more valuable than any championship: universal respect from fans, fighters, and media who understand what greatness looks like. The interim title was validation of his skills, but his legacy was built on something much more substantial than any single accomplishment. He became the kind of fighter that other fighters wanted to test themselves against. The kind of opponent that elevated everyone who shared the cage with him. Throughout his career, Poirier never took easy fights or avoided dangerous opponents. When the UFC offered him big names and big paydays, he took them regardless of stylistic matchup problems or potential career risks. This approach defined his entire championship-level run. The Conor McGregor trilogy exemplifies this perfectly. After losing their first encounter years earlier, Poirier could have avoided the rematch when McGregor was at his most popular and dangerous. Instead, he took the fight and delivered one of the most satisfying knockouts in recent UFC history at UFC 257. The doctor's stoppage victory in their rubber match at UFC 2064 further cemented his superiority over one of the sport's biggest stars. His technical knockout of Justin Gaethje in 2018 came when Gaethje was considered the most violent lightweight contender, a fighter whose leg kicks and power punches had ended multiple careers. Poirier didn't care about the risks. He wanted to prove he belonged among the division's elite, and he did it by beating the most dangerous available opponent. The submission victory over Michael Chandler in 2022 showed his evolution as a complete martial artist. Chandler was a legitimate threat with knockout power and wrestling skills, but Poirier found a way to win on the ground against a fighter many considered stylistically difficult for him. Every signature victory came against elite competition who presented real threats to his career and legacy. Poirier never padded his record with favorable matchups or demanded easy fights to protect his ranking. He earned his reputation by consistently accepting the toughest available challenges. After victories, he was humble and respectful to defeated opponents. After losses, he was gracious and honest about his mistakes without making excuses. This consistency of character, regardless of circumstances, separated him from fighters whose personalities changed based on their most recent result. That kind of perspective is incredibly rare among elite athletes, especially in a sport as ego-driven as mixed martial arts. Most fighters become consumed with championship pursuit to the point where everything else becomes secondary. Poirier maintained balance throughout his career, understanding that titles are just one measure of success. His public comments consistently reflected someone who understood that his identity extended far beyond fighting results. He was a husband, father, community member, and businessman who happened to be an elite fighter, not an elite fighter who happened to have other interests. This perspective allowed him to compete at the highest level without the desperation that destroys many careers. He wanted to win championships, but he didn't need them to validate his self-worth or define his legacy. While many fighters talk about giving back after retirement, Poirier was actively making substantial community impact throughout his active career. The Good Fight Foundation turned his fight nights into real opportunities to help people in Louisiana who needed support most. The foundation's work wasn't just symbolic gestures or photo opportunities. This wasn't a retired athlete looking for tax benefits or positive publicity. This was an active fighter using his platform and resources to make measurable differences in people's lives while still competing at the highest level of his sport. The timing matters tremendously. It's easy to become philanthropic after retirement when you have time and perspective. Doing meaningful community work while maintaining elite performance as a professional athlete requires exceptional time management, genuine commitment, and proper prioritization. Poirier's foundation work proved that his values extended far beyond personal achievement. He understood that his success came with responsibilities to the community that supported him, and he fulfilled those responsibilities while still active rather than treating them as retirement projects. The authenticity of his charitable work was evident in the consistency and scope of the projects. These weren't one-time publicity events. They were ongoing commitments that required sustained effort and resources over multiple years. Smart fighters understand that athletic careers are temporary, but the businesses and relationships built during those careers can provide security and purpose for decades afterward. Poirier exemplified this approach by developing ventures that reflected his authentic interests and personality. His hot sauce partnership wasn't just a random endorsement deal. It connected to his Louisiana roots and personal interests in ways that made sense for long-term brand building. The venture felt authentic because it genuinely reflected who he was outside the cage. More importantly, he developed these business relationships while still active rather than scrambling to create post-retirement income after his fighting career ended. His forward-thinking approach gave him financial security and professional identity beyond fighting. The businesses weren't attempts to become someone different. They were extensions of his existing personality and interests. This authenticity made them more likely to succeed and more sustainable as long-term ventures. Having legitimate business interests also made retirement easier because he wasn't losing his entire professional identity when he stopped fighting. He was transitioning from one aspect of his career to others that he had already developed and proven viable. This kind of preparation separates fighters who retire successfully from those who struggle with post-career depression and financial instability. Poirier showed that elite fighters could compete at the highest level while simultaneously building sustainable post-fighting careers. Announcing his retirement immediately after the Holloway fight, surrounded by home state fans who had supported him throughout his journey, was the perfect symbolic ending. He left while still competitive, still respected, and still capable of elite performance. The timing meant he could walk away with his health intact, his reputation secure, and his relationships undamaged by the kind of desperate late-career decisions that tarnish so many legacies. He proved that knowing when to stop is just as important as knowing how to fight. Retiring in New Orleans added emotional weight that money couldn't buy. These were fans who had supported him from the beginning, who understood his journey, and who deserved to be part of his farewell. The location made the retirement feel like a community celebration rather than just a personal decision. Walking away on his own terms meant his final memory as an active fighter would always be that gracious, grateful speech in front of a loving crowd rather than a devastating knockout or career-ending injury in some random venue. Dustin Poirier's retirement blueprint should be required study for every fighter who dreams of legendary status. He showed that true legends don't just win fights, They elevate the sport, impact their communities, prepare for life after competition, and leave on their own terms with dignity intact. A legend retires by giving everything to the sport while it matters, thanking everyone who made the journey possible, building something meaningful beyond individual achievement, and walking away before the sport can take more than it gives. Poirier checked every box, creating a template that future generations of fighters should follow. His final chapter proved that how you finish matters more than any single victory or defeat. The perfect goodbye isn't about winning your last fight. It's about leaving the sport better than you found it, with respect earned, legacy secured, and examples set for everyone who comes after. In a sport where most retirements are sad endings, Dustin Poirier wrote a beautiful conclusion that will inspire fighters for decades to come. He didn't just retire like a legend, he showed everyone what legendary retirement looks like.